How's it? Welcome back. So I wanted to go ahead and shoot a quick response to a comment that I got here recently on one of my videos about hypnagogia. And in particular, I wanted to highlight a part of this comment where he's theorizing where these deeper forms of hypnagogic imagery are coming from. And so, yeah, we'll highlight that part when we get to it, but I wanted to go over the whole comment as well because he brings up several different points that are good for me to go ahead and bounce off of. And so he writes, I have a new experience while trying to induce wilds. The flashing lights and the hypnagogic imagery takes way too long to start. It's a little frustrating. And that is very true. And I feel like a good point to highlight, especially for people who are kind of newer to this practice, because you're basically are trying to fall asleep. And then if you're trying to purposefully, consciously stay aware during this process, the fact that you're keeping your conscious awareness intact while you're lying down in bed can thus make it harder for you to fall asleep. So it's a pretty fine line you got to walk. Actually, just yesterday, I recorded a video about what I like to do to kind of help myself fall asleep quicker while I'm, essentially meditating my way to sleep. As long as I remember, hopefully I'll post that video right before I post this one. He continues, when an image finally shows it's just a blank blue sky, I tried to look somewhere else, but everything other than the blue sky stays black. The scenery is not progressing. And one thing I would wonder is, is it always a blank blue sky that he sees, or is it sometimes different? But very often when when the imagery first starts to show up, it can kind of pop up in like a smaller section of what you're seeing behind your closed eyes, normally kind of towards the center, but I've seen it before where it'll pop up in, different parts of what I'm seeing behind my closed eyes. But that tends to be how it starts, and then everything else around it will be essentially pitch black. And on top of that too, it doesn't really progress all that quick either unless you're falling asleep really quickly. And most of the time for me is if I do see, say, like something in the center and it's not the full-on imagery that I'm seeing yet, taking up all the vision behind my closed eyes, it's not like that small part that I'm seeing tends to progress. What happens most of the time is it will all blank out, and then a new thought or image will pop up and take up more of the space of what it is that I'm actually seeing. But yeah, it can take a while to have that stuff progress. I tried to use my ears to see if there is sound I could hear, but there was none. And I've actually been starting to play around with this more and trying to use sound as a way to build up my hypnagogia. And even when I am having some success with it, but it's not so much like a clear hearing. It's more like a kind of sense and vibe that I'm getting off of it. When I'm really sleep deprived, then I can hear like full on sounds, and like I'll hear music sometimes, and I gotta like wake myself up out of it thinking like, is someone playing music really loudly at this odd time of night? But that's really just me tripping. But some people are more audible oriented than others. For me, I'm not that audibly oriented, so I don't tend to clearly hear stuff too much. But yeah, that's a fun thing to try and a nice technique to add. But if you're not really naturally inclined towards that, I would kind of focus on other aspects of the hypnagogic meditation practice. Usually, those images can be seen in front at the back of my eyelids. But do you know what it is called when the scene pops up from the back of the mind? This is the part I wanted to highlight. It looks more like a visualization. It looks more like a visualization or imagination, somewhat dreamlike, but it's not the one, but I'm not the one who's controlling the scenario. And so that to me is what the deeper stages of hypnagogia kind of feel like. At first, you might be seeing a starry night sky or a soft diffused light, or maybe like a blank blue sky in front of you, right? Kind of seems more like it's in front. But once you start to get deeper into it, and essentially these random thoughts and images that you have running in the back of your mind or your subconscious, those things start to pop up, and that's when it's a real full-on image that can progress into like a movie type scene that you're witnessing. And so yeah, I still would absolutely consider that hypnagogia for sure. Where was I? If I engage these scenes, my awareness starts to melt and fade until I fall asleep without knowing it. And that part kind of surprised me, because normally if I engage with it too much, when I am having these full-on, thoughts and images start to pop up from my subconscious, is instead of having me lose my awareness, it tends to just wake me up and black everything out. One way, though, that I think you might be kind of getting at here is when these background thoughts and images start to pop up, they tend to be packed with a narrative. And so if you engage with it in that sense and kind of start following the narrative, then it is essentially how we tend to lose our conscious awareness all the time, right? We get wrapped up in that. We forget that we're lucidly or consciously awarely watching this, and then we lose our lucidity and fall asleep unconscious as we typically do. If I just observe the scene and narrate what I'm seeing, the scenery stops and freezes. I can still see the scene, but the characters stop moving. And I think that's, again, that's just you kind of engaging too much of your mental awareness and too much effort, so it kind of starts to mess that up and essentially start to wake you. It is neat that it tends to stay there and freeze, but like most of the time, if I engage too much, it just blacks everything out. But that still sounds about correct to me, right? You're over there, you're trying to observe and narrate it, but you're kind of kicking in too much of that mental thought process, so it's kind of starting to pull you out of it. But really, you obviously are progressing pretty good in your practice. I would just keep at it. You can try this every single time you go to sleep. So, you got a long time to really learn about this state and progress your skills at it. I tried to look for sounds. Again, he tries a sound thing, tried to touch something or touch my hands, but it doesn't feel right, as if I'm just imagining it. The experience is nowhere near what I experienced from the other day when the hypnagogic image... That experience is nowhere near what I experienced from the other day where the hypnagogic imagery, it feels more real and responsive. Okay, maybe I'm blanking on that. I'm not too sure what that means right now. But yeah, a lot of times if you are inside of this hypnagogic liminal dream state, it's not a full-on REM style experience, right? It's more like kind of you're watching it versus you being in it in the first person like you are in regular types of dreams. So if you are going to try to imagine rubbing your hands together and doing things like that and touching and feeling things in the environment, it is going to be more like you're just imagining it versus you are really doing it, because you haven't really crossed that threshold and started having a full-on wild. And now I do know you are kind of talking about specifically trying to induce wilds, right, through the hypnagogic state. But really, most of the time, there's a pretty clear distinction on when you're in hypnagogia and when you enter into REM, right? A lot of the times we'll have like a strong body high sensation going into it, like you're being sucked into the dream, and then it will be like, boom, you're seeing it, then all of a sudden, boom, you're in it in the first person. And at that point, you can start feeling and touching things in the environment, doing dream stabilization techniques like rubbing your hands together and all of that. But anyway, this video went on way longer than I was expecting. Thanks for the comment, and if you have any other questions, feel free to follow up with me. And until the next video, keep your hypnagogic meditation practice legit.